This time, in this video, we are looking at society in the reign of Elizabeth I. So English society remained under aristocratic domination under Elizabeth I. So this meant that the gap between the rich and the poor widened, and whilst there were the beginnings of a consumer society among the rich, the poorest members saw themselves victims to enclosure and the decline in real wages. So this meant the wages after inflation had been taken into account. But seeing as each of the previous four ducal titles, so that was the Duke of Somerset, the Duke of Northumberland, Duke of Suffolk and the Duke of Norfolk, had suffered a traitor's death, Elizabeth ensured that she did not create any more dukes. However, the number of peers and the 5 ranks of peerage included the Duke, the Marquess, the Earl, the Viscount and the Baron remained similar. So in 1547 there were 51 peers, and in 1603 there were 55. But Elizabeth mainly relied upon the nobility that had been appointed under Henry VIII, and she made very few appointments. So notable exceptions were Lord Burleigh and the Earl of Leicester. But many of the nobles sought to enhance their prestige through massive building projects so that they could accommodate the Queen. These included Burleigh House, which was built by Lord Burleigh in Northamptonshire, and Wilton House, which was built in Wiltshire by the Earl of Pembroke. But the rise of the gentry was one of the key elements within Elizabethan England, and they started to rival the nobility. And the gentry ranged from influential knights and figures of national importance, such as Sir Christopher Hatton, to modest local landowners. But in the middle ground of the gentry, it consisted of JPs, and that's Justice of the Peace, and the country gentlemen. So along with the nobility, they controlled local government. Now it's time to look at lower orders of society, as in the 15th century, the living standards of the poorest people had improved because of the depopulation caused by the Black Death. However, the population rises in the 16th century reignited these poor conditions for the poor. So population increases led to wages not keeping pace with inflation and increased pressure upon food supplies. This meant that around 50% of the population lived at or lived below subsistence level. On the other hand, there were increased opportunities for people because of the increase of opportunities within the mining sector or weaving, and this was often limited to particular locations. Elizabeth was also influential in introducing poor laws to aid the poorest people in society, and we looked at this when we looked at economy of Elizabeth I. So by the end of Elizabeth's reign, there were approximately 4 million people, and the majority of these people lived in the countryside, yet there were around 150,000 in London, and this had increased from 1.5 million in 1470. So this population growth was despite the multiple disease outbreaks within the 16th century. So for example, there were fresh outbreaks of the plague in 1551 and 1552, and influenza outbreaks in 1556 and 1558, which were all through Mary I's reign. These epidemics also coincided with poor harvests. So for example, harvests were at their worst from 1549 to 1551 and 1554 to 1556. So next thing to look at is Wales, and to start this off we're going to look a little bit at Henry VIII and what he did to Wales. Because although Wales was under English control, before 1536 it was a separate territory from England, and it didn't have a political link with England or a single unified administration. But this was changed in the Law in Wales Act of 1536, and this divided Wales into shire counties operating on the same basis as English counties, giving the Welsh shires direct representation in the House of Commons, and it brought Wales under the same legislation as England. So this meant that Wales soon had little individualism, with the exception to some areas which still spoke Welsh. So control of Wales continued under the Crown, but this became the responsibility of the aristocracy and the Welsh gentry. So by Elizabeth's reign, the Welsh border was no longer a problem, and the integration of England and Wales had continued. However, much of Wales remained extremely poor, and cultural differences remained. So the structures of border administration, which included the Council of Wales and the Marches, did remain in operation though. And the Council of Wales and the Marches had been founded by Edward IV, and under Henry VIII in 1542 it had gained statutory recognition. So this meant that the council could oversee the administration of the area and oversee the law. and Sir Henry Sidney was president from 1560 to 1586, and Sir Henry Herbert was president from 1586 to 1602, and they aided the western part of the nation and the people of Wales. The Welsh language had also disappeared within government, however it did remain within religion, and both the Book of Common Prayer and the Bible had to be translated into Welsh. The Welsh language was also preserved through dictionaries. Poverty also remained very common within Wales, and when Essex launched his coup in 1601, a disproportionate number of Welshmen were involved, and this would signify that there was a significant level of discontent towards the government from a Welsh perspective. Now we just need to look at the north of England, as border administration in the north of England caused far more problems, and this was because Scotland remained an independent state, and there was also a culture of lawlessness on the border, which led to casual violence and the rustling of sheep and cattle. Traditionally, the responsibility for border administration had lay with the families of the great northern magnates, and Henry VIII had appointed Southerners though, and Elizabeth had continued this strategy. But the problem with this tactic was that it was hard to control either the border clans or the northern families without a local land base. So this meant that Elizabeth sometimes resorted to using the second rank of northern landowners, and notable examples included Sir John Foster, and Sir John Foster was known for exploiting his office for financial gain rather than maintaining border security. Border security was worsened when many of the rebel leaders of the 1569 rebellion escaped into Scotland, and the border issues were then increased between 1578 and 1585, and in 1585 Francis Russell, who was the son of the Earl of Bedford, was murdered. So the maintenance of law and order lay with a council of the North, which was based in York. However, Elizabeth was unwilling to grant the office to a member of the northern nobility, and instead she awarded the post to a southern magnate, and this also created problems. So finally, we just need to look at the prosperity and the depression in the reign of Elizabeth I. And in terms of prosperity, landowners did profit from the economic trends within Elizabethan England, and they had been especially able to profit from the increase of land under Henry VIII and Edward VI, which was due to the dissolution of the monasteries. There also seemed to be a general increase of living standards for farmers, and harvests were normally good, however there were many poor harvests as well. However, in terms of depression, the real wages did fall, and this was a particular problem at the time of harvest failure. And out of the 44 harvests, it was reported that 9 could be described as poor. So this was especially disastrous when there were 4 successive poor harvests from 1594 to 1597. And this provided the context for the subsistence crisis of Elizabeth's reign, which took place between 1596 and 1597. But the impacts were far worse further north, and in Newcastle it was reported that 25 homeless people were buried from starvation. So thank you for watching this video, and see you soon. Bye.